So shortly after tying the knot, the young married couple started arguing over who should make the coffee in the morning. Being a good Christian woman, the wife went to scriptures for her answer. She said the Bible specifically stated that the man should be the one to make the coffee. Puzzled, the husband asked her where in the Bible it said that. Very confidently, she opened her Bible to the New Testament and she says, it says right here, Hebrews. Uh-oh. So as we've been saying, we're going to start today the journey into spending some time with Dr. Emily Cady's book, Lessons in Truth. And I want to share with us that I'm struggling with the desire to figure out how we can share this not intellectually. Because what Dr. Cady has to teach, just as Suzanne did in her meditation, is that what we're grasping for here as true students is an experience of God, not head knowledge about God. We can read the Bible from the beginning to the end and we can quote Scripture, but if we don't feel what's being taught us there, what's the point? It may have value as a door, but we have to find a way to walk through it. So Dr. Cady, her book is actually about how to open that door and walk through it. So many of us have read Lessons in Truth. I haven't read this book in a long time. And so it's just been a sheer joy and pleasure for me to dive down into it. And since we're true students and many of us have read this book at least once, some of us have read it multiple times. Some of us have taken classes on it. I remember Jim Lee teaching a long series of classes and Lessons in Truth. I myself, my first encounter with this was at Dorothy Pearson's kitchen table, and she invited me to come into her home, and we sat down, and she gave me her interpretation of Lessons in Truth. Some of us have been doing study groups. Suzanne was sharing with me, how many years have you been studying, your group been studying Lessons in Truth? 9 years. 9 years. So her group has been through it once, and they're gone through it another time. So there's something about what Dr. Cady is sharing with us that brings us back time and time again. And it occurred to me, part of what the attraction is this book is just a highly polished mirror into which we look to see ourselves in God. So I was thinking, last time we surveyed this, I think it was a year ago, we decided that we have a collective, cumulative 2,000 years of New Thought study and experience and practice. So let's just keep that lens in mind. I'm going to just share some thoughts. It is impossible to grasp everything that Dr. Cady wants to share with us. And the more I worked on this talk, the more I was like, okay, we're going to finish this talk in September. Because there's so much. There's so much. So one of the things that occurred to me as a way to enter this contemplation of what Dr. Cady has to teach us is to take a fresh look at something that we say every Sunday. Suzanne led us into it today. Because our opening affirmation, there is only one presence, one power, one love, active in my life, God the good, omnipotent, is, in my opinion, a one-sentence version of Lessons in Truth. It's all there. So let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at what we say, see if we can reawaken a new appreciation for this, because I don't know about you, if I say something over and over and over again, I sometimes lose the joy and the value and the feeling of what I'm saying. Even though in my soul, it's jumping for joy, in my mind, I may not be paying any attention. So, there is. We start out by stating pure being, essence. There is. There not only does it exist, but beyond existence. Something that's never born and never dies. There is only The sole, unique, single being without another, without a second. There is only one presence. So what this means is all experience of presence. Notice your breathing. That experience of presence is God. There's only one presence, one power. Every force that moves something, any particle or element, any thought, is God. One love. Everything that attracts something to something else. Everything that brings people together into harmony is God. There is only one presence, one power, one love. Active. But we don't say there's only one presence, one power. Passive. Active. Pure being, even as it is, all that is not merely inert. In its expression as presence, power, and love, it's changing everything from moment to moment. We are not the same as we were when we walked in this room, because the one presence, one power, one love is active in our life, and it's changing us right now. Active in my life. The unique and only one presence, power, and love animates and transforms me now in this moment, and now in this moment, and so on and so on. In this ministry, this presence, power, and love enlivens not only each of us individually, but each of us in our communities. And not just this ministry, but all ministries, all communities, all places where two or more gather. The one presence, power, and love is active. It's transforming, it's animating, it's changing us. Active in the world. And so it is, as Dr. Katie will show us, it's active in both the manifest and the unmanifest realms. That which is seen and that which is unseen. The presence and power and love is active everywhere. So there is only one presence, one power, one love active in my life, active in this ministry, active in the world. God. Well, God is the name that we give to this. God is how we enter in thought into this activity. The good, God the good, omnipotent. So we acknowledge that this one presence, one power, one love that we call God is an all-powerful good that pervades the universe and has no opposite. There's nothing outside of the all-powerful, the all-good. So every Sunday, we actually affirm lessons in truth in one sentence. Would you be willing to share it with me? We're going to say one presence, one power, active in my life, in this ministry, and in the world as one sentence, rather than the 3 times that we normally do it. Okay? Together, there is only one presence, one power, one love, active in my life, in this ministry, and in the world. God the good, omnipotent. So, if we can feel the vibration of what we say in our bodies, we begin to prepare ourselves to take a look at lessons in truth in depth. But before we do this, I thought it was kind of interesting to take a little look at this woman who actually wrote this book. Because her life story is quite fascinating, and I think it's important to appreciate what she created by knowing a little bit about her first. So many of you know this, but some of us may not. I didn't know most of this stuff. Harriet Emily Cady was born in 1848 in Dryden, New York. Now, Dryden is a small town just outside of Ithaca in the Fingers Lake region of upstate New York. It's halfway between Syracuse and Binghamton for anybody who's from that area. Her parents were prosperous farmers. It was a very prosperous farming area in the first part of the 19th century. And from an early age, she took over the one-room schoolroom in Dryden, and she was the schoolmistress there. Now, what I thought was really fascinating about this little town is that it's on the border of what the great revivalist Charles Grandison Finney called the burnt-over district. Anybody heard of the burnt-over district? So the burnt-over district was called that because it was an area of upstate New York in which the fervor of the Second Great Awakening, which grabbed the mind and imagination of many Americans in the first part of the 19th century, was particularly strong in that region. And the Great Awakening was, just like the First Great Awakening, it was this mass movement of energy, physical energy and joy for the presence of God. And it was particularly powerful in Presbyterian and Methodist churches, but it was in this area of New York that Emily Cady was born in that it was particularly powerful. And it was called burnt over because God's energy burnt over and seized and changed everybody in that region. One of the consequences of that particular area of America being part of this Great Awakening with such particular fervor was that many of the great reform movements that became part of our country started there. The women's rights movement, abolition, mass education movement, all came from this area. So it makes sense to me that Dr. Cady's fervor for New Thought was part of that great culture that she was born in. This was not something that was strange to her. After she moved to New York in the late 1860s, there began in the exact same area where she grew up, the Chautauqua movement. Many of you have heard about the Chautauqua movement. That was basically the TED Talks of the second part of the 19th century. People got together in tents and heard talks about science and religion and history, much like the TED Talks offer us today. So after the Civil War, she decided she wanted to be a physician. So we can appreciate that this woman was a pioneer because there weren't a whole heck of a lot of women physicians that were licensed in the United States in that period. So she moved from Dryden to Manhattan, and she attended the Homeopathic Medical College of the state of New York, which is now known, still there, it's now known as New York Medical College. This particular college had only been founded a few years earlier in 1860 by a group of reformers that was led by the publisher of the New York Post that many of us have heard of, William Cullen Bryant. It was one of the first medical institutions in the country to pursue a patient-centered healing philosophy. So she decided to get a medical degree in an institution that itself was leading edge in focusing on patient-centered healing. It also was a pioneer because it welcomed not only women, but African Americans, and it graduated the first African American woman to be licensed as a physician in the state of New York. This college that our dear friend Dr. Cady attended. And she received her degree in 1871, and she decided to stay in New York City to pursue her career. Among the many things I found fascinating about what she then did is that she was particularly attracted to the work of a Presbyterian minister named Albert Benjamin Simpson, also known as A.B. Simpson for those of you who come from the Presbyterian tradition. Now, this was a Canadian who emigrated to New York by way of Kentucky, and he was particularly attracted to serving what we would call today the underclass. So New York City at that time was teeming with immigrants from all parts of the world, and so his mission and ministry was to those who were just arrived in America and were looking for stability and the opportunity to create their own lives in this new country. He also served African Americans, and others who were poor. When he left his Presbyterian church to take on this ministry, it was called the Christian and Missionary Alliance. His ministry emphasized the role of faith in physical healing. So we can see why Dr. Cady would be attracted to A.B. Simpson. Later on, in the latter part of his life, he became a leader in the early 20th century Pentecostal movement. So when Dr. Cady, or when Emily Cady came to do her physical or her studies to become a doctor, she had already decided that she wanted to study and pursue a holistic approach, what we would call a holistic approach, body, soul, mind. Not just to heal the body, but also to heal the spirit and the soul. And that she already had an intuition that there was some relationship between physical health and spiritual health. So naturally, she sought sources that could help her figure out what that would mean practically. Now, being a product of her day and age, the first place that we are told she went to was the Bible. But she also was, because of where she came from in the burnt-over district of New York, and because of her studies in Manhattan, she was brought to the works of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is considered the godfather of New Thought. She also, it is said, eventually studied under Emma Curtis Hopkins. And I looked really hard to find how that actually happened. If anybody has some information about how she hooked up with Emma Curtis Hopkins, I'd really like to know. This is important, as for most of us know, Emma Curtis Hopkins was perhaps one of the most powerful and effective teachers in the New Thought movement. She herself had been associated with Mary Baker Eddy, and to her everlasting credit, she broke with Eddy and started her own theological seminary in Chicago. I think her genius was her capacity to attract and organize a network of thought leaders. Because when you look at the list of people that Emma Curtis Hopkins influenced or specifically taught, it ranges from the Fillmores to Emily Cady and ultimately to the founder of religious science, whose name I just blocked on. Who? Ernest Holmes, yes, thanks. But I think Ernest Wilson was in there too, so thank you for that. So it was, I'm spending just a little bit of time on what Emma Curtis Hopkins did, because it was through this network that she created that the Cadys and the Fillmores met each other. So around 1890, so a year after the Unity Practical School of Christianity was founded by the Fillmores, a year later, Dr. Cady, in her own practice, wrote a pamphlet that was called Finding the Christ in Ourselves, and she sent a copy to the Fillmores. I'm sure she sent a copy to other people in the Emma Curtis Hopkins network. But Myrtle Fillmore found this pamphlet to be of particular cogency, and she caused it to be published in what was called the Modern Thought magazine, which is now called Unity magazine. And that was in October of 1891. And there was a great, powerful response to those who were reading Modern Thought magazine to this work. And so Myrtle asked Charles to persuade Dr. Cady to become a regular contributor to Modern Thought magazine. And Dr. Cady was reluctant to do that because she was very busy and successful in her practice. But I get that Mr. Fillmore had some very persuasive capacities, and she agreed. And so she started to send in monthly articles. The first one she sent in was called Neither Do I Condemn Thee, which was published in January of 1892. In the meantime, as Unity was attracting adherents, many people were asking the Fillmores for a foundational statement and exploration of these principles that Charles and Myrtle had come to understand and appreciate. So I find this to be one of the most fascinating things about Unity. It's one of the things that attracted to me is that Charles Fillmore said, I'm not going to do this. He didn't write the Quran. He hired this woman that he had never met except through correspondence in Manhattan and asked her to take on the task of creating the foundational text. And again, Dr. Cady allowed herself to be persuaded, and so she began to write what became Lessons in Truth, and these were done in a series of monthly articles that were published in, by that time now, Unity magazine, starting in October of 1894. And after all 12 chapters had been published, they were gathered together and published in book form in 1896. Unity Publishing says that in the intervening 115 years, Lessons in Truth has sold over 1.5 million copies. So I'm hoping that we can get that up to 1.5 million and 20 copies. Dr. Katie, in the meantime, was prospering in her medical practice, and she lived until 1941. She died in her 93rd year. 1941 was just over a year after the beginning of World War II. So her life expanded, or her life spanned 1848, the year of great revolutions in Europe, all the way to 1941, World War II. And think of all the history that occurred in that period of time, and let us appreciate the contributions that Dr. Katie made, not only to our understanding of ourselves, but also to the metaphysics of evolution and human unfoldment that was going on in her time. So just some background on Dr. Katie. I really think it's powerful to appreciate where she came from to offer us some of these insights. So just some thoughts about the beginning of the book. Many of you may know I was an English major in my undergraduate, and so I've always been attracted to method. How are people engaging us in writing? And one of the things I looked at when I first began to reread Lessons in Truth is the first sentence. So remember Moby Dick, Call Me Ishmael, or Road Less Traveled, Life is Difficult. The first sentence can set the tone for what follows. So those of you who have your books, and I ask you to bring your books from now on if you have Lessons in Truth, because I'm going to quote extensively from the book. But the very first words, after she quotes a couple of passages from St. Paul, are, "Every man believes himself to be in bondage to the flesh and to the things of the flesh." Every man believes himself to be in bondage to the flesh and to the things of the flesh. So she starts the book out with a stark statement of the human dilemma. What are we up against? She makes it clear that what she means by the flesh and the things of the flesh is the dimensional world of time and space, the world of sense and thought, the world of beginnings and endings. Now, this dimensional world is the very womb in which we humans are conceived and from which we are born. We are born as flesh. The spirit and soul within us exist as potential, but those things have to be given time to develop to come into consciousness. So we start out as flesh. So no wonder we believe ourselves to be in bondage to that, because those are our beginnings. Our beginnings start in the conditional circumstantial world. The fetus and the newborn babe, with our underdeveloped neocortex, are utterly incapable of experiencing what we spiritually advanced adults have come to appreciate as the reality of God, or of divine mind. But interestingly enough, her reference to the flesh and things of the flesh are not the most important words in that first sentence. No, the most important word is believes. Man believes. So although we may be born as conditional beings into a world of circumstance, dimension, and limitation, these are ultimately so only because we believe them to be so. So the very first sentence grabs our attention and sets the stage for what she is going to teach us. Man believes. Belief is our challenge. And we believe that we are in bondage to the flesh and the things of the flesh. So then in the next paragraph, she goes on to quote the book of Exodus. God is talking to Moses. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians, and to bring them out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. She does this because the very next thing she's going to do is she's going to offer a metaphysical interpretation of that passage. And her interpretation will carry three fundamental new thought principles. Those principles are, we shape our reality with our thoughts. God's will is that we be delivered from lower to higher consciousness, and that there's a way that we do this if we're willing to read the Bible as a metaphysical handbook. So here's how she recasts that quote as a metaphysical interpretation, linking us back to the first sentence about our belief about bondage. Here's what she says. Today and all the days he has been saying to us, his children, I have surely seen the affliction of you who are in Egypt, which she calls darkness of ignorance. So Egypt is a symbol of darkness of ignorance. And have heard your cry by reason of your taskmasters, which she calls, in parentheses, sickness, sorrow, and poverty. So we are enslaved by our belief in the primacy or the validity of sickness, sorrow, and poverty. And I am, she says, not I will, but I am now, come down to deliver you out of all of this suffering and to bring you into a good and large land, unto a land flowing with good things. So she starts this lesson by stating the dilemma. We believe that the world we see with our senses is the only reality. And then the actual problem that created this dilemma, the content of our beliefs, and proceeds to indicate the way out of this dilemma is found in the Bible when understood metaphysically. She then boldly affirms that the order of things is the actual world of divine mind, consciously designed to draw us out of this initial bondage into a freedom that is the metaphysical equivalent of a land flowing with milk and honey. And all of this on the first page. So thinking about everything that we just heard, we're thinking about it with our mind. So let's experience this through the power of affirmation. Now, affirmations is chapter 5, but we've already read it, so we can do affirmations. There are two affirmations I see that will help us feel the truth of this lesson. The first is this. I'm going to say it once and ask you to reflect on it and then repeat it after me. I am 100% responsible for the world I see. I am 100% responsible for the world I see. Would you affirm that with me together? I am 100% responsible for the world I see. Ooh. How does that feel? But the second is the liberation. I am open and receptive to God's living presence in me. I am open and receptive to God's living presence in me. Together? I am open and receptive to God's living presence in me. And as we did last time I spoke, when we did joy songs, I'd like for us to now cement this in a vibrational way through song. So would you be willing to open to hymn number 359? And we're going to sing this affirmation. 359 says, we make our own world. I would like us, if we could do a real quick translation and turn that we into I. I make my own world wherever I am. My happiness is of my own making. I make my own world wherever I am. This is the I am power. So would we stand and would you lead us? Okay, so that's our first lesson in truth. Let's just close our eyes and feel that energy from the truth that I make my own world with God's help and guidance through the Christ in me. So, Divine Presence, we are grateful for lessons in truth from Dr. Emily Cady, this powerful woman who gladly took on the request from Charles Fillmore, 1,000 miles away in Kansas City, to open her heart, to share the truth as she saw it, understood it, and felt it. And we're still feeling it here today, 115 years later. And we commit ourselves to being the lesson in truth. Amen.